Hi guys. Welcome back to the channel. Another week sans Tanner because he is going to Hawaii tomorrow, I think. So it'll be another week without us filming together, which is a bummer, but we do have some fun things planned for when we're back together, so that'll be cool. Today I wanted to do a convert themed Q&A because obviously a lot of ex-Mormons, their experiences that they were born in the church, realized it wasn't true, left, some variation of that. So I just wanted to give more of a voice to the convert experience and share some honest answers about my experience with converting when I was 16, left when I was 22, for those of you who don't know. I actually get quite a lot of messages from people saying that they were investigating Mormonism, meeting with the missionaries, had friends who were Mormon, and were thinking about joining, and then they found our videos and it helped them realize that they shouldn't join because the missionaries obviously don't tell you the full truth about the church. And while Mormons can be absolutely wonderful people, in my opinion, it's not a great way to seek the kind of a belonging that I think a lot of us converts are seeking when we join the church. I think there's better ways to find community than religions with a lot of dogma, or religions that are high control in a way, high demand, make you give 10% of your money, were founded by a hebephile and a liar and a con man. So yeah, we're just gonna have a chat today. I'm gonna answer questions that you guys submitted on Instagram. So the first question that I got a lot of variations of was, what convinced you to join? What appealed or spoke to you? So essentially the reason I started investigating the church was because I had a friend who was Mormon. He was lovely. His whole family was lovely. And I became acquainted through them. I went over to their house for dinner one time and the missionaries came, and it was just kind of went from there. But really what was appealing looking back, with a wiser perspective than I had at the time, was, well, number one, lovely people. As someone who grew up an only child with a lot of trauma in my home, it was very appealing, this idea that you could have, the picture perfect family. And not that I didn't think that could exist outside of Mormonism, but, obviously that's a big sell that Mormonism has. Mormonism really sells this idea of happy families, and the Mormon family I knew were a very lovely, seemingly happy family. So that was a big draw. Also, I'd been sort of exposed to Christianity enough. I was never encouraged to be Christian, but I got Christianity light a little bit from a vicar that would come into our primary school sometimes. I went to brownies, so occasionally I would go to a Church of England service to get extra brownie points. And so if I was gonna be drawn towards a religion, I suppose at that time it would be Christianity. I didn't necessarily believe in God or that Jesus was the savior of mankind, but sort of the narrative had been planted enough that it wasn't so crazy. And also I was young and vulnerable and impressionable. So when the missionaries say, oh, there's all these different churches and all of them, claim to follow Jesus or whatever, but we have a restoration of the fullness of the gospel, and they use the metaphor of a mirror being smashed and people pick up different pieces of it, and how Mormonism was the restoration, all of those pieces together. That metaphor was compelling to me as a 16-year-old. I didn't at that time know that that's how many churches feel. I hadn't had enough exposure to religion and critical thinking as 16. And I didn't know anything about sort of the psychology of why people become religious, so I wasn't able to sort of see it in myself. I suppose a part of me could sense that I wanted the sense of belonging. And that was a big part of it. Sorry, I don't know if I'm answering this question, but there's just so many different ways I could answer this. But the core of it all is I was drawn to the community and to the sense of belonging. And when you are a new convert, especially if you're young, or maybe not especially, but for me personally, I got a lot of really nice attention at church. And that was very appealing to me, just feeling loved and held by these people. And it was this exciting new thing. And it was almost because I hadn't been raised religious, but had a little bit of religious influence, I wonder if that almost made me more vulnerable, because I really had always maybe sort of wondered about religion. When I was younger, I would pray just in case, to this vaguely Christian God when things would get hard for me. Not very much, just every now and then. I think traumatized children are especially vulnerable to religion, and I think being 16, 17, 18, the years when I was really getting converted, I think you are vulnerable at that age because you really don't know anything about the world at that age, or yourself, or the psychology of religious conviction, or how groups like Mormonism operate, and so you really are just led purely by emotion, and you're very vulnerable to being enamored by groups that love you, or make you feel loved. So sorry, rambly answer, but that's the basic gist. Someone said, did you join because of the doctrine or the community? And I'm not downplaying that I really did buy into the doctrine, but I do think in hindsight, like, the community was the primary thing. Even though if you would have asked me at the time, I would have said, I don't know what I would have said, actually. Someone else said, what things did you see that made you think Mormonism was good / desirable? Again, community, feeling like everyone had really nice families. I actually liked the idea of people not drinking because I went through a lot of traumatic things that alcohol was a part of. And I did, growing up, I saw alcohol as something that was quite scary. And I was kind of anti-alcohol before Mormonism, even though I had started drinking a little bit at parties and stuff with friends. Yeah. So I found the rules almost comforting. It's like I saw my family as so dysfunctional and messy that it was just like someone was selling me the idea of a cleaner, more perfect family, and that was appealing. Can anyone relate who's a convert? Someone said, being a convert myself, I'm curious to know how you were treated before and after your baptism. So I joined the church in England, don't know if I said that, and everyone in my ward was really nice and just a lot of really good people, and that didn't change before or after baptism. It actually took me a long time to get baptized because my mum didn't want me to, so I got baptized at 17. I was sort of like a dry Mormon for a year, but yeah, I didn't really get treated, it wasn't like everyone stopped being nice to me because I got baptized and it was like, oh, she's in now. Like I did feel the support of the ward, so not too much there. What was your first impression of the church? So I didn't hear about the church until I became friends with my Mormon friend. And it was just kind of like, oh, that's kind of weird and interesting. I knew it was vaguely Christian. Didn't really have many thoughts about it other than that. What level of spirituality / religiosity did you have before joining? How did that influence your choice? Yeah, I kind of talked about that. But I was very much an agnostic, had little Christian seeds planted, but growing up in England, definitely no one was that focused on religion or trying to get you to be religious. Even, going to Church of England services, like with the brownies, it didn't feel like anyone's trying to convert you really intensely the way that we see with Mormonism. I think there's more room for sort of more casual religiosity in England, but obviously England is not a super religious environment compared to the US, which feels very Christian. Did members hide facts about church history before you joined, like racism, polygamy? Yes, absolutely. There's almost, I wonder how you would pull off having someone get baptized if you did tell them the whole truth, and also how many members know the full truth. Like, I was in the church for 6 years before I started learning stuff. And even now, it's like I don't know the full truth. There's just so much Mormon history that is so insane. And you can really devote your life to studying it. But yeah, I didn't know really anything about the racism or polygamy. Certainly no details if there were things I knew. And I remember one time a friend of mine reached out and told me about Mormons being polygamous or in the past or whatever, and sent me a link to someone. And then I remember asking the missionaries and they were like, oh, that's anti-Mormon literature, don't trust it. And I was young and impressionable, so I was like, oh yeah, cool. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I just won't look at it. Someone else said, how did you feel after realizing the missionaries didn't tell you the full story about the church / gospel? I don't feel any sort of negative way towards them, because I just feel like they're victims of the church. They haven't been able to give informed consent to going on a mission or going through the temple or being Mormon. Like the church itself is hiding this stuff. And I mean, since I joined, 10, 11, 12 years ago now, there's a lot more openness about issues, but even back then there wasn't. And so I imagine most of the missionaries either didn't know about it or had heard a little bit and then received some kind of apologetic explanation that they were able to, have be enough for a time. A lot of the missionaries who originally taught me have actually left the church now, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, I didn't feel lied to, because I get that in their minds, even if there's stuff that they know they're not telling me, they genuinely believe it's for the greater good, that this thing is true and milk before meat and all that. So, I mean, obviously finding out that the church wasn't true was traumatizing and horrifying in so many ways. And I did feel angry at the church, at kind of members in general, but don't know that it ever extended particularly to missionaries, because I just don't feel like it was their fault. Someone said, how comfortable are you slitting your throat if you tell Mormon secrets? Well, I went through the temple after the throat slitting had ended. Did I? Wait, I did, right? Yeah. So technically I'm not bound to that. When did things start to shift for you in regards to your membership? So I got baptized when I was 17, was very into it, my last year of high school. And then I went to BYU, Idaho, where I was fully Mormon the entire time I was there. Had a good time. In hindsight, I mean, I can see so many times in my college experience where I was struggling, not necessarily with the church, but like just kind of struggling generally, and I was looking to the church as a solution, and it did provide like obviously this comfort, and I would do all the things like pray and read your scriptures, which in a weird way can still help when you're going through things, because it's you're making that sort of quiet reflective time for yourself, and I saw God generally as quite a loving figure. One of the appeals, I'm sure, of Mormonism for me was, again, not having like a happy home growing up, and God is this perfect parent figure that you never got to have in your real life. So it's very appealing. I get the appeal of the concept of God for most people on earth, because I feel like most of us experience some level of childhood trauma and of disappointment in our parents. Because humans are imperfect, and children, we really see our parents as these perfect figures, and then they fall from grace at a certain point when we realize they're not that. And even if you have lovely parents, I feel like that's still something you have to reckon with. Someone said, what were you shocked to learn that you hadn't been told before you were baptized? This is sort of an interesting one, because obviously after getting baptized, I was learning more and more, and it's not necessarily just anti-Mormon stuff, like learning about garments, for example. I don't think I knew about those till after baptism, as far as I can remember. But yeah, there were things where I was like, oh, whoa, but it's because they really do things line upon line, and I was like a pretty good student in the sense that like I did seminary and I listened to what the missionary said, and I didn't look up anti-Mormon stuff. By the time I was learning things, I had already reached a level of indoctrination where I was able to integrate it. So didn't really have a lot of cognitive dissonance until... Oh, did I even finish my previous story? Until I graduated from BYU, Idaho, worked at Deseret Book as an intern, and then me and Tanner, who I do this channel with, started having a faith crisis and learning more. And by that point, it was just like, it was so big, like learning, going through the process of questioning, and then questioning more, and then having the questioning become like so insurmountable that it just felt like I was going crazy. Like all of that was just so huge. It was like so different from just like me as a little 16, 17-year-old learning about the church in England and going along because everyone's nice to me. Like it just was something so different by that point. It was this like hugely traumatizing thing. That's interesting to think about. It's interesting to look back on how I was just this 16-year-old girl who didn't know anything and just really wanted to be loved and to belong to something. Yeah, it's interesting to think how young I was, but didn't see myself as that young at the time, because, you know, at 16, 17, you it's really that age where you feel like you know it all. It's really the peak Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Of the smarter you are, the more you realize you don't know, but less smart people think they know more than they do. I mean, I feel like me at 16, 17 was peak that. And I think people who went through a lot of childhood trauma also tend to be drawn, I think, to sort of more rigid ideologies. I also had undiagnosed OCD throughout my childhood, and I can't help but think that played a role, because it's, you know, the OCD brain loves having arbitrary rules to follow to feel like it's good. Anyway, back to sorry, this is so rambly and all over the place. I hope it's watchable. I think for a lot of people, if you experience a lot of childhood trauma and you obviously don't get the emotional support that you need, it's pretty common for people to see you as just like bad, because you don't act like other children necessarily. You do act out, and there are ways that you like seek attention and seek, I suppose, love, in ways that aren't looked upon nicely by adults. And as much as, like, so many adults haven't reckoned with their own childhood trauma, and they don't understand children, so they're not equipped to help children who are acting out. And so I think that was a big thing for me. Like, I'd always been like a straight A student and obsessed with being good in school. But outside of that, it was like I never really felt like people saw me as good. And like, I grew up really overweight and being bullied for that. And so I always felt bad, like a bad person because of that. You know, there's ways that being fat gets moralized, which is so sad to think about. And Mormonism provided a way for me to feel good, because it was like, if you do these things, you're doing the right things. And so in many ways, Mormonism did have a good impact on me, and sort of did help me advance my life and my psyche, because it gave me this opportunity to feel more lovable and good. And I did need that sense of belonging at that time. Otherwise, you know, I wouldn't have sought it. And then as I got older, you know, went through college, graduated college, it was like, I think my brain was ready to learn more, you know. I don't know that being a lifelong member was ever really on the cards for me. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think your brain will only let you see or learn what it's ready to see or learn. And this is why I try to be compassionate about believers who just sort of seem to engage in willful ignorance, because it's terrifying. And I think for some people, it's just not on the cards to learn that your life is a lie. I mean, that's a hard thing to learn, you know. And I suppose it made it a bit easier that I wasn't born in it, but it also, there was other stuff that you have to deal with as a convert who, you know, willingly chose this thing, and then you realize it's false. Like, there's a lot of shame and cringe, lifelong cringe, at the ways that you changed and acted. And like, ultimately, it's all fine, and I have compassion for every version of myself. I've always just tried to do the best I can at the time, like most of us. But yeah, it is weird to think about. I think for me, Mormonism was a good, as I said, springboard in certain ways. And I also think I'm really glad that I had the experience of buying fully into this worldview, having it crumble, and then being forced to rebuild. Because even though at first, oh God, it's so horrifying, even like wondering how you can rebuild, or if you can, or, you know, once your brain gets used to a religious way of looking at life, and sort of having this, you know, false perception that you know what will happen after you die, and you know what's right and wrong. Like, it, once your brain is used to being like that, it does take some time to sort of entertain new ways of thinking. Luckily, I didn't grow up Mormon, so that sort of helped, because I was able to go back to certain mindsets I'd had before. You know, it wasn't like this brand new thing for my brain. But ultimately, realizing that this thing I bought into fully was false was a good, almost ego death experience. You know, it's very humbling to realize how wrong you can be and how the things that you're the most convinced are true are on the sandiest foundation. Like, that's kind of a good experience to have, especially if you're someone who, like, you know, is sort of interested in thinking generally and like looking at how the world works honestly, which I always was. I just for a time believed that Mormonism was the truth, obviously. As much as it's such a weird trajectory to have joined the Mormon church in England, moved to America for it, then left it, then stayed here, and now I do ex-Mormon stuff. Like, that's so bizarre and random. But I wouldn't change it, because I think, I mean, you can never know what type of person you would have been otherwise, but I think I'm a better person for having had the experience. And I think I have more empathy for people with different mindsets. I think I am able to have empathy for people who are so committed to harmful ideas because they truly believe that they are the truth, the only way. Like, I wouldn't have been able to understand, like, someone who supports Donald Trump, I think, if I hadn't have gone through the Mormon experience. But what the Mormon experience taught me is just how all of us can become so convinced of things, you know, through various methods, and then how hard it is for people to change their minds once their sort of sense of psychological safety or their sense of how the world works is tied up in that. And ultimately, leaving Mormonism forced me to confront the reasons why I joined and to learn about the psychology of why people join high demand religions like Mormonism, which was then forcing me to look at my childhood and past and all that. So it ultimately led me on this giant healing journey that I would almost say began when I joined Mormonism, in a way. I mean, everything's, you know, is there a stop point for anything? I don't know. I think I'm going to end here. Yeah, those are my final thoughts. Wouldn't change it for the world, but would definitely like for other people to not join under false pretenses. Because it's not, everyone's life won't work out wonderfully necessarily in the way that I feel that mine has because they joined the Mormon church. You know, it's kind of just random, and I suppose there's a degree of like life's what you make of it too, but I just felt like I got really lucky in a lot of ways, where it was like I had a pretty positive experience in Mormonism, had a lot of fun being at BYU Idaho. It was fun being in another country where everyone was really nice to me because I was British. Like, those things are all good for me. I think Mormonism helped me build self-esteem and social skills in a lot of ways. Grew up an only child, so, you know. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have more questions you want me to answer, I can totally do a part 2, so put them in the comments. I've tried to just touch on the main ones I got asked in this video, and I didn't want to make it too long. As always, if you want to support the channel, we are on Patreon. We do bonus videos on there, so highly recommend. And thank you to our patrons who do support us already. We love you. I hope you're all doing well. If you are a convert, I would love to hear your answers to some of these questions. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're all looking after yourself, and I will see you soon. Also, if you like this video, please give it a like. Our engagement is down right now from not posting for a while, so we need all the help we can get.